The Last Supper, the Crucifixion and the Resurrection. As the legend is related by Plutarch, the death of Osiris was preceded by his betrayal, and the betrayal, which was the work of his twin brother Sut, took place in the banqueting room. Sut, having framed a curious ark just the size of Osiris's body, brought it to a certain banquet. As this was on the last night of Osiris's life or reign, and on the last night of the year, the meal may fairly be called the Last Supper of Isis and Osiris, chapter 13. Now this mystery of the Last Supper can be traced in the ritual as the first of a series acted in Amenta. Sut and his associates had renewed the assault upon Osiris on the night of laying the evening provisions upon the altar, called the night of the battle in which the powers of drought and darkness were defeated and extinguished. The coffin of Osiris is the earth of Amenta. Dawn upon the coffin was the resurrection, and this provender is imaged as the dawn upon the coffin of Osiris, which shows that the evening meal, or Eucharist, was eaten in celebration of the resurrection and the transubstantiation of the body into spirit. The night of laying provisions on the altar is mentioned twice, once when Osiris is in the coffin, provided by Sut and his associates, the Sebau, who entrapped him in the ark. The second mention follows the erection of the tat sign which denoted the resurrection, hence the dawn upon the coffin of Osiris, which is equivalent to the resurrection morn. The resurrection on the third day originated in lunar phenomena. 28 days was the length of a moon, and this is no doubt the source of the statement that Osiris was in his 28th year at the time of his betrayal. The moon is invisible during 2 nights, which completed the lunisolar month of 30 days. The assault upon Osiris the good being made by Sut was periodically renewed. This has just occurred when the first of the 10 mysteries is enacted, Ritual chapter 18. The scene is in the house of Anu, Heliopolis, where Osiris lay buried and Horus was reborn. The triumph of Osiris over his adversaries is in the resurrection following the dramatized death of the inviolate god. This is called the night of the battle, when there befell the defeat of the Sebau and the extinction of the adversaries of Osiris. It is also described as the night of provisioning the altar, otherwise stated, the night of the Last Supper, when the calf of the sacrificial herd was eaten at the mortuary meal, which represented the body and blood of Osiris, the bull of eternity. Ritual chapter 1. The second mystery of the 10 is solemnized upon the night when the Tat pillar was set up in Tatu, or when Osiris in his resurrection was raised up again as a type of the eternal. The third mystery is on the night of the things that were laid upon the altar in Shechem, which imaged the altar and the offering in one. This was the circle of Horus in the dark, the sufferer made blind by Sut, the victim in the Tat who was the prototype of Jesus on the cross and representative of the god in matter. As we have seen, a great Memphian festival, answering to the Christmastide of later times, was periodically solemnized at the temple of Medinet Habu in the last decade of the month. Shoyak, from December 20th to 30th, which lasted for 10 days. One day, the 26th of the month equal sign December 24th, was kept as the feast of Sakari, the god who rose again from the mummy, and this was the principal feast day of the 10. In all likelihood, the whole 10 mysteries were performed during the 10 days of the festival that was celebrated at Memphis. Ehrman's Life in Ancient Egypt, English translation, page 277. Prominent among these was the Feast of the Erection or re-erection of the Tat Pillar of Stability, which was an image of Ptah Sakari, the coffined one who rose again, and who in the later religion becomes Osiris Sakari, Lord of Resurrections, whose birth is from the house of death. The resurrection of Osiris, which, like other doctrines, was based on the realities of nature, would be appropriately celebrated in the winter solstice. At that time, the powers of darkness, drought, decay, and death, now personalized in Sut, were dominant, as was shown in the lessening water and the waning light of the enfeebled sun. The Tat type of stability was temporarily overthrown by the adversary of Osiris and his co-conspirators, the Sibo. Here begins the great drama of the Osirian mysteries in 10 acts, which is outlined in the ritual. The putting of Osiris to death, so far as a god could suffer, was followed by the funeral, and the burial by the resurrection. The opening chapters of the ritual, called the Coming Forth Today, are said to contain the words which bring about the resurrection and the glory, also the words to be recited on the day of burial that confer the power of coming forth from the death on earth and of entering into the new life of the manes in Amenta. Horus is described as covering Tesh Tesh, a title of the mutilated Osiris, as opening the life fountains of the god whose heart is motionless, and as closing the entrance to the hidden things in Rusta, chapter 1, verse 18. The two divine sisters are present as mourners over their brother in the tomb. They are called the mourners who weep for Osiris in Rekhet, line 15 and 16. The mysteries thus commence with the burial of Osiris in Amenta as a mummy. The mummy-making that was first applied to preserving the bones and body of the human being had been afterwards applied to the god or son of life in matter, imaged as the typical mummy of Osiris that was buried to await the resurrection in and afterwards from Amenta. In both phases it is Osiris, as the god in matter, who is represented in the nether earth. And the re-arising of the human soul and its blending with the eternal spirit were dramatically rendered in the mysteries as the resurrection of the Osiris, or the soul of mortal Horus, re-arisen in Amenta as the son of Ra. In the Gospels, Judas, the brother of Jesus in one character, elsewhere called the familiar friend, is the betrayer on the night of the Last Supper, and Judas, the son of perdition, answers to Sut, the twin brother of Osiris, in the later Egyptian mythos, who was his betrayer at the Last Supper called the Messiu, or evening meal that was eaten on the last night of the old year, or the reign of Osiris. The 12 disciples only are present at the Last Supper in the Gospels. In the betrayal of Osiris by Sut, the number present in the banqueting hall is 72. These were officers who had been appointed by Osiris. The number shows they represent the 72 duodecans as rulers in the planisphere, but the 12 have been chosen to sit at supper with the doomed victim in the Gospels instead of the 72 who were also appointed by the Lord and are dimly apparent in their astronomical guise as the 72, or 70, who are present in the scene where Jesus triumphs over Satan as he falls like lightning from his place in heaven, Luke chapter 10, verse 17. One of the most striking of the various episodes in the Gospel narrative is that scene at the Last Supper in which Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, compared with the washing that is performed by the Great One in the ritual. In the Gospel, Judas is waiting to betray his master. Jesus says to the betrayer, "That thou doest, do quickly." Now it should be borne in mind that the ritual, as it comes to us, consists to a large extent of allusions to the matter that was made out more fully in performing the drama of the mysteries. Washing the feet was one of the mysteries pertaining to the funeral of Osiris, when the feet of the disciples or followers of Horus were washed. It was one of the funeral ceremonies. As it is said in the ritual, chapter 172, "Thou washest thy feet in silver basins made by the skillful artificer Ta-Sakari." This was preparatory to the funeral feast, as is shown by the context, chapter 172. In the Gospel, John 13, the funeral feast becomes the Last Supper, when Jesus riseth from supper and layeth aside his garments. And he took a towel and girded himself. Then he poureth water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. And here is a passage of 3 lines, called the chapter by which the person is not devoured by the serpent in Amenta. O Shu, here is Tatu, and conversely, under the hair of Hathor, they sent Osiris. Here is the one who is to devour me. They wait apart. The serpent Seksek passeth over me. Here are wormwood bruised and reeds. Osiris is he who prayeth that he may be buried. The eyes of the Great One are bent down, and he doeth for thee the work of washing, marking out what is conformable to law and balancing the issues. Ritual chapter 35, Renuf. This brief excerpt contains the situation and character of the Great One, who, with eyes bent down in his humility, does the work of washing, and explains why this ceremony has to be performed by him in person. The washer is he who is in presence of the one who waits to betray him, devour him, or compass his destruction, and he beseeches a speedy burial. Osiris in this scene is a form of the typical lowly one who had been in type as such for ages previously. But the most arresting fact of all is hidden in the words, O Shu, here is Tatu, the place of re-establishing, under the wig, or hair, of Hathor, the goddess of dawn, one of whose names is Mary. And it is here, beneath the hair of Hathor Mary, they perfume and anoint Osiris for his burial. This, when written out as history, contains the anointing and perfuming of the feet of Jesus by Mary, who wiped them with her hair. Luke chapter 7, verse 38. The two bathings of the feet are separate items in the Gospels, whereas both occur in this one short chapter of the ritual in which Osiris is anointed for his burial, and at the same time he does for others the work of washing and purifying, marking out what is conformable to law and balancing the issues. Osiris also is he who prayeth that he may be buried, and Jesus, knowing that his hour has come, says to Judas the betrayer, that thou doest, do quickly. And later, Friend, do that for which thou art come. Matthew chapter 26, verse 50, which is the equivalent of Osiris praying that he may be buried. The wormwood bruised or crushed, and the reeds are utilized in the crucifixion for furnishing the bitter drink, which was offered to the victim with a sponge placed upon a reed. A reed was also put in his right hand. These things were portrayed in the drama of Amenta. They were acted in the mysteries and explained by the mystery teachers. The Osiris passes through the same scenes and makes continual allusion to the sufferings of Osiris, or Horus, his great forerunner, and finally the drama was staged on earth and reproduced as history in the Gospels. That is the one final and sufficient explanation of episode after episode belonging to the mysteries of Amenta reproduced according to the canon as veritable gospel history. The scene in Gethsemane may be compared with the scene in Pa, where Horus suffered his agony and bloody sweat when wounded by the black boar Sut. Pa was an ancient name of Sasenu, a locality in the lunar mythos, which was also called Cayman, later Smen, a word signifying number 8, applied to the enclosure of the 8, and the suffering of the wounded Horus in Am-Smen is, as now suggested, the Osirian original of Jesus bleeding in Gethsemane. Pa is not called a garden, but it is described as a place of repose for Horus that was given to him by his father for his place of rest. Ra says, I have given Pa to Horus as the place of his repose. Let him prosper. The story is told in the chapter of Knowing the Powers of Pa, Ritual chapter 112. The question is asked, Know ye why Pa hath been given to Horus? The answer is, it was Ra who gave it to him in amends of the blindness in his eye, in consequence of what Ra said to Horus. Let me cook at what is happening in thine eye today. And he looked at it. Ra said to Horus, Pray, look at that black swine. He looked, and a grievous mishap befell his eye. Horus said to Ra, Lo, mine eye is as though Sut had made a wound in it. And wrath devoured his heart. Then Ra said to the gods, Let him be laid upon his bed that he may recover. It was Sut who had taken the form of a black swine, and he wrought the wound which was made in the eye of Horus. And Ra said to the gods, The swine is an abomination to Horus, may he get well. And the swine became an abomination to Horus. Ritual chapter verse 112, Renuf. It was in Pa that Horus was keeping his watch for Ra by night, when the grievous mishap befell his eye. He was watching by command of Ra, who had said to Horus, Keep your eye on the black pig. The eye was lunar, with which Horus kept the watch for Ra, and Sut, in the form of the black boar of darkness, pierced the eye of Horus with his tusk, the moon being the eye of Horus as the watcher by night for Ra. Sut, on whom he kept the watch, transformed himself into a black boar and wounded Horus in the eye, whilst he was watching on behalf of Ra as his nocturnal eye in the darkness. Jesus in the Gospels keeps the watch by night in Gethsemane, as is shown by the disciples failing to keep it. The watch by Horus was necessitated on account of Sut, who is the typical betrayer in the Kamite mythos, as Judas is in the Christian version. Sut knew the place in the original rendering and sought out Horus there when he caused the agony and bloody sweat by mutilating him. Now Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, to which Jesus often restored with his disciples, and there the betrayer seeks him out to betray him, not in the form of a black boar that put out the eye, which was the light of the world, but as a dark-hearted person befitting the supposed historical nature of the narrative. The scene of the drowsy watchers in Gethsemane is apparently derived from a scene in the Mysteries. There is a reference in the ritual, chapter 89, to those undrowsy watchers who keep watch in Anu. In the Gospels, Jesus asks his followers to watch with him in the garden, and on both occasions he found them sleeping. The moral is pointed by the undrowsy watchers in Anu being turned into the drowsy watchers who slept in Gethsemane, and who failed to keep the watch. "I know the powers in Pa," says the speaker. "They are Horus, Amsta, and Hapi. That is, Horus and the two brothers, who correspond to the two brethren James and John, the sons of Zebedee in the Gospels, and who are here the two with Jesus in the garden. The conversation betwixt Horus the son and Ra the father, the watching by night, and the bloody sweat are followed by the glorification of Horus. Ra gives back the eye, the sight of which was restored in the new moon." In the Gospel, John chapter 17. This glorification of Horus as the son of the father Horus, who had previously been the son of the mother, Harsi-Hesi, only is anticipated and described as about to occur when the torment and the trial are over. These things spake Jesus, and lifting up his eyes to heaven, he said, "Father, the hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son may glorify thee, even as thou gavest him authority over all flesh." That was in the character of Horus the mortal. "Now, O Father, glorify me with thine own self," in the character of Horus divinized or glorified. The temporary triumph of the treacherous Sut, the power of darkness, is acknowledged by Jesus when Judas betrays him with a kiss, and he succumbs. "This," he says to his captors, "this is your hour, and the power of darkness, Sut." And they seized him. Luke chapter 22, verse 53. But when the associates of Sut saw the double crown of Horus on his forehead, they fell to the ground upon their faces. Ritual, chapter 134, verse 11. And when the associates of Judas equal sign Sut the betrayer came to take Jesus of Nazareth, and he said, "I am," not "I am he," they went backward and fell to the ground. Scene for scene, they are the same. One of the titles of Horus is Lord of the Crown, chapter 141, verse 9, which possibly led to Jesus being crowned King of the Jews. In this scene, the title of Jesus of Nazareth has the same effect on the associates of Judas that the assuming of his crown by Horus had upon the associates of Sut when it caused them to fall on their faces before him. The crowning of Jesus on the cross is as Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The crown of triumph is assigned to Horus by his father Adam, and all the adversaries of the good being fall on their faces at the sight of it. Ritual chapter 19. The scene in the Garden of Gethsemane and the cry to the Father from the sufferer on the cross are very pitiful, the essence of the tragedy working most subtly on account of the supplication that was all in vain, which makes all the more profound appeal to human sympathy. In the Egyptian representation, there is no such cruel desertion by the father of his suffering son in his agony of great darkness. It is far otherwise in the ritual. When Horus suffers his agony in the darkness, after being pierced and made blind by Sut, Ra, the Father God, is with him to comfort and sustain him. He tenderly examines the bleeding wound and soothes him in his great affliction. Ra charges his angels concerning Horus, or bids the gods to look to his safety and see to his welfare. Ra said to the gods, "Let him be laid upon his couch that he may recover." He also gives the eye of Horus fire to protect him and consume the black boar of darkness. There is no sightless sufferer groping helplessly with empty hands outstretched and left unclasped in the dark void of death, no vain and unavailing cry of the forsaken son that stuns the brain and scars the human conscience, and is of itself sufficient to empty the Christian heaven of all fatherhood, and ought to be sufficient to empty earth of all faith in such a father. According to the synoptists, Jesus did not carry his own cross to the place of execution. It was borne thither by one Simon of Cyrene. This is denied in the gospel attributed to John, who declares that Jesus went out from the judgment hall bearing the cross for himself. John is generally truest to the Egyptian original, and here the figure of Jesus bearing his own cross is equivalent to the figure of Ptah Sakari, or Osiris Tat. The Tat of a fourfold foundation was the prototype of the cross, and the victim extended or standing with arms akimbo is equivalent to the victim stretched upon the cross of suffering. Sakari was the sufferer in, or on, or as the Tat, and Osiris was raised in, or as the Tat, where Jesus carries the cross. The scourging of Jesus previous to his being crucified has never been explained. According to the record, he was not condemned to both modes of punishment. It is probably a detail derived from the mysteries of Osiris Sakari, Jesus scourged at the pillar being an image of Osiris or Ptah, as the suffering Sakari in or on the Tat, the pillar with arms, that was superseded by the cross in the Christian iconography. In the Egyptian drama of the Passion, Horus was blinded by Sut and his accomplices in suffering his change from being the human Horus to becoming Horus in spirit. The incident that is almost omitted from the gospel account was preserved in the mysteries, as in passing through fire and water was evidently continued and extended in the sports and pastimes. Still, the blindfolding of the victim for the buffeting is implied in the gospel according to Matthew. Then did they spit in his face and buffet him, and some smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy unto us, thou Christ. Who is he that struck thee?" Matthew chapter 26, verse 68. It was a common popular tradition that the Christ was of a red complexion, like the child or calf which represented the little red sun of winter, and also the Virgin's infant in its more mystical character. Moreover, there is a tradition of a crucified child Christ who was colored red like the calf in the paintings. Among the portraits of God the Son, Didron cites one in a manuscript of the 14th century, which answers to the red Christ as a co-type of the red calf. The manuscript contains a miniature of the priest Eleazar sacrificing a red cow, and opposite to this miniature is one of Christ on the cross. Jesus is entirely naked, and the color of his skin is red. He is human, poor and ugly. The red Christ, equivalent to the red Horus, is here identified with the red cow, and therefore with the red calf of the ritual, which was a symbol of the little red sufferer, the afflicted one in the winter solstice. In some of the mystery plays, the Christ wore a close-fitting, flesh-colored garment, through which the nails were driven into the wood of the cross. The resurrection robe was always red. Satan wants to know who this man in the red coat may be. And when Horus rises again in the character of the Avenger, it is as the Red God. The Manes thus addresses him, "O fearsome one, who art over the two earths, Red God, who orderest the block of execution." Ritual, chapter 17, Renouf. Jesus likewise appears to have been represented as the Red God, or the God in red, for they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. Matthew chapter 27, verse 28. A papyrus reed was the throne and scepter of Horus, the sign of his sovereignty. In the pictures he is supported by the reed, and one of his titles is Horus on his papyrus. Ritual, chapter 112, Renouf. The reed also has been turned to historic account in making a mockery king of Jesus. And they plaited a crown of thorns and put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they kneeled down before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spat upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. Matthew chapter 27, verse 27 through 30. Jesus is posed in another form of the Osirian sacrificial victim. One meaning of the word sakari is the silent. This is the typical victim that opened not his mouth, as the inarticulate Horus. So, having been assigned the character of the silent one before Pilate, Jesus no more answered anything. It is possible that the crown of thorns placed upon the head of the crucified was derived from the thorn bush of Unbu, the solar god, especially if we take it in connection with the papyrus reed, another type of Horus, and they plaited a crown of thorns and put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. Matthew chapter 27, verse 29. The god and the branch, which is a bush of flowering thorn, are identified, the one with the other, under the name of Unbo, and the god in the Unbu thorn is equivalent to the crucified in the crown of thorn. Moreover, Unbu, the branch, was a title of the Egyptian Jesus. I am Unbu of An-Arar-F, the flower in the abode of occultation, or eclipse, Ritual chapter 71. And if Horus was not figured on a cross with the Unbu thorn upon his head, as the crown was afterwards made out, he is the sacrificial victim in the place of utter darkness or sightlessness. Horus in An-Arar-F is Horus, Lord of Sekhem, Horus in the dark. He is also Unbu, that is, Horus in the thorn bush. Thus, the Unbu thorn was typical of the god, who was personified as Unbu by name, and who is Unbu as Horus the sufferer in the dark, equivalent to and the prototype of the victim on the cross as wearer of the crown of thorn. It is also possible that Pilate's question, "What is truth?" may now be answered for the first time. Jesus says, I come into the world that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. John chapter 18, verse 37. And in his second character, Horus the king, Horus the anointed and beloved son, not only came into the world as testifier to the truth, he was also given the title of Harmakeru, the name of the word that was made truth by the doing of it in his death and resurrection, and the demonstration of a life hereafter at his second coming. The typical darkness at the time of the crucifixion might be nocturnal or annual, according to the mythos. When Atum, god of the evening sun, is setting from the land of life at the point of equinox, with his hands drooping, which is equivalent to the victim who was extended on the cross, a great darkness overspread the earth, and Nut, the mother, is said to be obscured as she receives the dying deity in her supporting arms. The figure is the same, whether the scene be on the cross or at the crossing. Ritual chapter 15. Still more express is the darkness spoken of in the Egyptian faith, or Gospel, chapter 17, which contains the kernel of the Credo. Here we learn that the darkness is of Sakari. Sakari is a title of Osiris, as the mutilated and dismembered god. It is explained that this darkness of Sakari, the god who is pierced, wounded, cut in pieces, is caused by Sut, the slayer, who has terrified by prostrating. Sakari is Osiris in the sekru, or coffin, and to be in the coffin, or in the cruciform figure of the mummy, has the same meaning, with a change of type, as if the divine victim might be embodied in the tot, or extended on the cross. The darkness of Sakari was in the coffin. The darkness of Jesus is on the cross. It is observable that the sixth division of the Tuat in Amenta, corresponding to the 6th hour of the night, has no representation of Ra, the solar god, and in his absence, naturally, there was darkness. But the 3 hours' darkness that was over all the earth at the time of the crucifixion has no witness in the world to its being an historic event. In the mythical representation, it was natural enough. As the night began at 6 o'clock, the 6th hour according to that reckoning was midnight, and from 12 to 3 there was darkness for 3 hours in the mysteries. The great darkness is described in the ritual as the shutting up of Seb and Nut, or heaven and earth, and the resurrection as the rending asunder. The main saith, I am Osiris, who shut up his father and his mother when, or whilst, the great slaughter took place. I am Horus, the eldest of Ra, as he riseth. I am Anup on the day of rending asunder. Ritual, chapter 69, Renuf. In the coming forth from the cavern, the risen one exclaims, Let the two doors of earth be opened to me. Let the bolts of Seb open to me, and let the first mansion be open to me, that he may behold me who hath kept guard over me, and let him enclose me who hath wound his arms about me, and hath fastened his arms around me in the earth. Chapter 68. The one who had held him fast with his arms about him in the earth, and who is the keeper of the dead on earth, is Seb. Hence it is he who kept guard over the body that was buried in the earth. The part of Seb is also assigned to Joseph of Arimathea, who took the body when it was embalmed with 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes, and made a mummy of, and laid it in his own tomb. The tomb of Seb, the earth, John chapter 19, verse 38 through 41, becomes the garden of Joseph. The bolts of Seb are replaced by the great stone that Joseph rolls against the door of the sepulchre, Matthew chapter 17, verse 60. And he who kept guard over the mummy Osiris in the sepulchre is represented by the guard who watches over the tomb in the history. Pilate said unto them, Ye have a guard, go your way, make it sure as ye can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone, the guard being with them. Matthew chapter 27, verse 66. The guard that is set to keep watch and ward at the sepulchre may be compared with the wardens of the passages, who are attendant upon Osiris in the tomb. These are the powers that safeguard the body or mummy of Osiris and keep off the forces of his adversaries. The passages are those which lead to the outlet of Rusta in the resurrection, Ritual chapter 17. In the chapter by which one arriveth at Rusta, the deceased has risen again. He says, I am he who is born in Rusta. Glory is given to me by those who are in their mummied forms in Pa, at the sanctuary of Osiris, whom the guards receive at Rusta when they conduct the Osiris through the demesnes of Osiris. In this scene of the resurrection, the deceased comes forth triumphant as Osiris risen, chapter 1:17. The dead are there in mummied forms, and these are received by the guards as they rise and reach the place of egress in Rusta. In the Gospel according to Matthew, a watch was set upon the sepulchre. The guard is spoken of as the centurion, and they that were with him watching Jesus. Matthew 27, verse 54. These were watching when the graves were opened, and the dead, in their mummied forms, were raised to come forth from the tomb. As nothing occurs in the Gospel except by miracle, the graves are opened by an earthquake for the passages to be made, which passages were very ancient in the geography and pictures of the Egyptian nether world. The guards, or soldiers, in attendance on Jesus, are 4 in number, at least it is said that they took the garments of the dead body and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, John chapter 19, verse 23. These guards correspond to the 4 guardians of the coffin Hapi, Tuamutef, Kapsenuf, and Amsu, who watch by the sarcophagus of the dead Osiris, one at each of its 4 corners. In a German passion play, the 4 are invincible knights named Dietrich, Hildebrand, Isengrim, and Lorraine. At the time of the death upon the cross, there is a resurrection which is not the resurrection. This is a general rising of the manes, not the resurrection of the Christ. And behold, the veil of the sanctuary was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the rocks were rent, and the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints that had fallen asleep were raised. In short, a general rising must have preceded the personal resurrection of Jesus on the 3rd day after the crucifixion. It is added, however, that the manes who had already risen came forth out of the tombs after his resurrection, and appeared unto many. Therefore they stayed in the open tombs a day or 2 longer, in order that he might have the precedence. When Horus rises as a spirit, the Lord of Mahurit, the risen one, is represented by a hawk, and he says, I am the hawk in the tabernacle, and I pierce through the veil, or, in another lection, through that which is upon the veil. To pierce through the veil of the sanctuary is equivalent to rending the veil of the temple. The hawk is a type of the sun god in the solar mythos and of the spirit in the eschatology. Thus the veil was pierced or rent asunder when Horus rose in the shape of a divine hawk to become the Lord of Heaven. In the Gospel, Matthew chapter 27, verse 51, at the moment when Jesus yielded up his spirit, it is said, "And behold, the veil of the sanctuary was rent in twain from top to bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks were rent, and the tombs were opened." And in brief, this was what the ritual terms the day of rending asunder, when the rocks of the Tser hill were opened, which is the day of resurrection in the mysteries of Amenta. The death of Osiris was followed by the Saturnalia of Sut, in a reign of misrule and lawlessness which lasted during the 5 black days, or dies non of the Egyptian calendar when everything was turned topsy-turvy, a Saturnalia which to all appearance is yet celebrated in Upper Egypt. James Fraser, Golden Bough, chapter 1, page 231. The mutilation of Osiris in his coffin, the stripping of his corpse and tearing it asunder by Sut, who scattered it piecemeal, is represented by the stripping of the dead body of Jesus, whilst it still hung upon the cross, and parting the garments amongst the spoilers. In John's account, the crucifixion takes place at the time of the Passover, and the victim of sacrifice in human form is substituted for and identified with the Paschal Lamb. But, as this version further shows, the death assigned is in keeping with that of the non-human victim. Not a bone of the sufferer was to be broken. This is supposed to be in fulfillment of prophecy. It is said by the psalmist, chapter 34, verse 20, "He keepeth all his bones, not one of them is broken." But this was in strict accordance with the law of totemic taboo. No matter what the type, from bear to lamb, no bone of the sacrificial victim was ever permitted to be broken, and the only change was in the substitution of the human type for the animal, which had been made already when human Horus became the type of sacrifice instead of the calf or lamb. When the Australian natives sacrificed their little bear, not a bone of it was ever broken. When the Iroquois sacrificed the white dog, not a bone was broken. This was a common custom, on account of the resurrection, as conceived by the primitive races, and the same is applied to Osiris. Every bone of the skeleton was to remain intact as a basis for the future building. After the murder and mutilation of Osiris in Sekhem, the judgment is executed on the conspirators in the mystery of plowing the earth on the night of fertilizing the soil with the blood of the betrayer Sut and his associates. This is done before the great divine chiefs in Tatu. In the Gospels, Matthew chapter 27, verse 6, the chief priests take the place of the divine chiefs in the mystery of plowing the earth and fertilizing or manuring it with the blood of the wicked. They buy the potter's field, and this was called Akeldama, the field of blood. The field of blood here, bought with the price paid for the betrayal, takes the place of the field that is fertilized with blood in the ritual. In the Acts, it is Judas himself, not the chief priests, who purchased a field with the reward of his iniquity. According to this version, Judas fertilizes or manures the field with his own blood, as does the betrayer Sut on the night of fertilizing the field in Tatu. When, in his resurrection, Jesus reappeared to the disciples, they thought it an apparition. This it should have been if the life had been human, the death actual, the story true. In the Egyptian, however, the day of reappearance is termed the day of apparition, but reappearing equal sign apparition is not necessarily manifesting as the human ghost. The Christ as Horus was not a human ghost reappearing on the earth, and Horus, the pure spirit, the typical divine Son of God, the reappearing one, might have denied being a phantom or a ghost, for he would not be manifesting to men, but to other characters in the religious drama. This being denied on behalf of the divinity, the carnalizers then had recourse to their human physics to illustrate the denial by making the risen Christ corporeal. In John's account, which is always the nearest to the Egyptian original, there is no denial of the ghost theory, no declaration that the risen one is not a spirit, but a veritable human body of flesh and bone. He merely showed unto them his hands and side, as Horus might have shown his wounds, and no doubt did show them in the mysteries, the wounds that were inflicted by Sut. In fact, when Sut has wounded Horus in the eye, he shows the wound to Ra, his father, Ritual, chapter 112. When Horus, or the Egypto-Gnostic Jesus, rises in the sepulchre on coming forth today, it is in the semi-corporeal form of the Charist mummy that has not yet become pure spirit, and therefore has not yet ascended to his father in the hawk-headed likeness of Ra. This figure can be studied in the tomb as that of Amsu. The scene of the resurrection is in Amenta, the earth of eternity, the earth of the mains, not on the earth of mortals. It is here the risen Horus breathes the breath of his new life into the sleeping dead to raise them from their coffins, sepulchres, and cells. When the Egyptian Christ or Charist rose up from the tomb as Amsu Horus, it was in a likeness of the buried mummy, as regards the shape, with one arm loosened from the swathes or bandages. But this resurrection was not corporeal on earth. Osiris had been transformed into Horus, and although the mummy shape was still retained, the texture had been transubstantiated. The corpus was transfigured into the glorious body of the Sahu or divine mummy. The mystery of transubstantiation was not understood by the writers of the Gospels, who did not know whether Jesus appeared in the body or in spirit, as a man or as a god. They carried off all they could, but were not in possession of the secret wisdom which survived amongst the Egypto-Gnostics. They wrote as carnalizers of the Christ. It follows that the risen Jesus of the canonical Gospels is not a reality in either world, neither in the sphere of time nor as divine Horus transfigured into spirit. 'Tis but a misappropriated type, the spurious spectre of an impossible Christ, a picture of nobody. The Christian history fails in rendering Horus as an apparition of Osiris. When Horus came from Sekhem, he had left the earthly body behind him in the sepulchre, and was greeted as pure spirit by the glorified ones, who rejoiced to see how he continued walking as the risen Horus, he who steppeth onward through eternity. Ritual, chapter 42. Jesus in this character comes forth from the tomb in the same body that was buried and still is human, flesh and bones and all. Thus, as a phantom, he is a counterfeit, a carnalized ghost, upon the resurrection of which no real future for the human spirit ever could or ever will be permanently based. A corpse that has not made the transformation from the human Horus into Horus, the pure spirit offers no foundation for belief in any known natural fact. Horus, in his resurrection, is described as being once more set in motion. At this point he says, "I am not known, but I am one who knoweth thee. I am not to be grasped, but I am one who graspeth thee. I am Horus, Prince of Eternity, a fire before your faces, which inflameth your hearts towards me. I am master of my throne, and I pass onwards. The path I have opened is the present time, and I have set myself free from all evil." Chapter 42, Renuf. But when he is transubstantialized, it is said of the deceased in his resurrection, "The gods shall come in touch with him, for he shall have become as one of them." Now let us see how this was converted into history. Jesus is the Prince of Eternity in opposition to Satan, Sut, or Judas, the prince of this world. In his resurrection, he is supposed to have opened the pathway from the tomb historically, and for the first time some 1800 or 1900 years ago. When he rises from the dead, he is unknown to the watchers, but he knows them. Mary knew not that the risen form was Jesus. He is not to be grasped, saying, "Touch me not, or do not grasp me, for I am not yet ascended unto my Father." John chapter 20, verse 14 through 17. On the way to Emmaus, Jesus appears and inflames the hearts of the disciples towards him, after calling them slow of heart, and they said one to another, "Was not our heart burning within us?" Luke chapter 24, verse 13 through 32. Horus had opened a path from the tomb as the sun god in the mythos, the divine Son of God in the eschatology, and he ascended to his Father, and took his seat upon the throne of which he had become the Lord and Master. So Jesus goes on his way unto the mountain, where he had appointed to meet his followers, Matthew chapter 28, verse 16. The mountain in the ritual is the mount of rebirth in heaven, whether of the sun god or of the enduring spirit. The change from bodily death to future life in spirit was acted as a transformation scene in the mysteries of the resurrection. The mummy Osiris was an effigy of death. The Sahu mummy Amsu Horus is an image of the glorious body into which Osiris transubstantiated to go forth from Sekhem as pure spirit. It is the mummy in this second stage that is of primary import. First of all, the dead body was smeared over with unguents and thus glorified. During the process of anointing it was said, O Asar, the deceased, the thick oil which is poured upon thee furnishes thy mouth with life. Budge, the Mummy, page 163. It is also said that the anointing is done to give sight to the eyes, hearing to the ears, sense of smell to the nostrils, and utterance to the mouth. To embalm the body thus was to charas it, and the embalmment was a mode of making the typical Christ as the anointed. Thus the mortal Horus was invested with the glory of the only God-begotten Son. Now this making of the crust, or mummy Christ, after the Egyptian fashion is apparent in the Gospels. When the woman brings the alabaster cruse of precious ointment to the house of Simon and pours it on the head of Jesus, he says, In that she poured this ointment upon my body. She did it to prepare me for my burial. Matthew chapter 26, verse 12. She was making the Christ as the anointed mummy previous to interment. After the description of the crucifixion, it is said that Nicodemus came and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds, and they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. John chapter 19, verse 39. This again denotes the making of the charised mummy, aka the Christ. Moreover, it is the dead mummy in one version, and it is the living body in the other which is anointed, just as Horus was anointed with the exceedingly precious Antu ointment, or oil, that was poured upon his head and face to represent his glory. The two Myrtai sisters are the watchers over the dead Osiris. They are also the mourners who weep over him when he is anointed and prepared for his burial. It is said of Osiris that he was triumphant over his adversaries on the night when Isis lay watching in tears over her brother Osiris, chapter 18. But the Myrtai sisters both watch and both weep over the dead body. In the vignettes to the ritual, one of the two stands at the head, and one at the feet of the body, on the bier. These two mourners, weepers, anointers, or embalmers appear in the Gospels as two different women. According to John, it was Mary, the sister of Martha, who anointed Jesus for his burial. And as these are the two divine sisters in historic guise, we ought to find one at the head of the victim and one at the feet, as in fact we do so find them. In the account furnished by Luke, it is said that the woman who stood behind at the feet of Jesus weeping began to wet his feet with her tears and wipe them with the hair of her head. Luke chapter 7, verse 38. No name is given for the woman who was a sinner, which seems to denote the other Mary called Magdalene. Matthew also omits the name of the woman with an alabaster cruse or flask. In keeping with the mythos, this other one of the two Myrtai sisters should be Martha. But the point is that the woman with the cruse does not anoint the feet of Jesus. She poured the ointment upon his head as he sat at meat. Matthew chapter 26, verse 7. Thus we see there are two different women who anoint Jesus, one at the head, one at the feet, even as the two divine sisters of Osiris called the Myrtai, or watchers, stand at the head and feet of Osiris when preparing him for his burial, or watching in tears like Isis, the prototype of the woman who never ceased to kiss the feet of Jesus since the time when he had come into the house. Luke chapter 7, verse 45. We have identified the other sister Nephthys, the mistress of the house, with the housekeeper Martha, and as Nephthys also carries the bowl or vase upon her head, This may account for the vessel of alabaster that was carried by the woman who poured the ointment on the head of Jesus, whereas Mary, the sister of Martha, poured it on his feet. Martha is one of the two Myrtae by name. In the Egyptian mythos, the two Myrtae are Isis, the dear lover of Horus the Lord, bowed at his feet, and Nephthys mourning at his head. The Charist mummy was the body of the dead in Osiris, who were prepared by human hands to meet their Lord in spirit, when wrapped in the seamless vesture of 1,000 folds, which was typically the robe of immortality, when they were baptized and purified and anointed with the unction of Horus taken from the tree of life. The process of preparing, embalming, and Christifying the mummy obviously survives in the chrism or crisum of the Roman Catholic Church. The chrism itself is properly a white cloth, which the minister of baptism places on the head of the newly anointed child. The chrism as ointment is made of oil and balm. In the instructions for private baptism, it is charged that the minister shall put the white vesture, commonly called a chrism, upon the child. The chrism cloth is still the vesture of immortality, for if the infant dies within a month after birth, the chrism is its shroud, and the chrism child becomes an image in survival of the Charist mummy in Amenta. Let it be assumed that to all appearance the resurrection in Amenta is corporeal. The human Horus, or the Osiris, who had passed through death and been laid out as the mummy in the Tuat, still retains the form of the mummy that was made on earth. The difference is in Horus having risen to his feet and freed his right arm from the burial bandages. Indeed, the dead were reincorporated in Amenta as the Sahu mummy. The Egyptian word Sahu signifies to incorporate, and in this physical-looking form, they were reincorporated for the resurrection in the earth of eternity. Amsu had made a change in rising to his feet, but was not yet the Horus glorified with the soul of Ra. Therefore he has not yet ascended to the Father. To the sense of sight he is corporeal still, and has not transubstantiated into spirit. When he does, the hawk or menah will alight to abide upon him, and he will assume the likeness of his father, Ra, the bird-headed Holy Spirit. It is the body-soul that rises in Amenta, which has to suffer purgatorial rebirth before it can become pure spirit, as the ritual of the resurrection has it, to attain eternal life. So far as reincorporation of the soul in Sahu shape could go, the resurrection is corporeal. Yet this was only a dramatic mode of representation in the mystery of transubstantiation, which included several acts. It is in this character of Amsu Horus reincorporated as the Sahu mummy issuing from the tomb that Jesus is described by Luke. "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself." Chapter 24, verse 39. In the absence of the Gnosis, the reincorporation in Amenta led to the doctrine of a physical resurrection at the last day on this earth. The power of resurrection was imparted by 881 Ra, the Father in spirit, to the anointed and beloved Son, and Horus is said to be the bringer of the breaths to his followers. Ritual, chapters on breathing 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, and 59. Horus, as he issues forth today in his resurrection, comes to give the breath of life to the manes in Amenta, saying, "I give the breezes to the faithful dead amid those who eat bread." This chapter of the ritual follows the decease of Horus, which is equivalent to the crucifixion of Jesus. In this, the speaker says, "I have come to an end on behalf of the Lord of heaven. I am written down sound of heart, and I rest at the table of my father Osiris." Chapter 70. It is also said in the rubric, "If this scripture is known upon earth, he, the Osiris, will come forth today. He will have power to walk on the earth amid the living." Jesus in the gospel has come to an end for the Lord of heaven. He likewise manifests on earth amid the living. He gives the breezes to the faithful dead when he breathes on them, saying, "Receive ye of the Holy Spirit." It is the woman in the Gospels who announce the resurrection and proclaim that Jesus has left the tomb. According to Matthew, the women are Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, who ran to bring the disciples word, chapter 28, verse 1 through 8. According to Mark, chapter 16, verse 1, the women were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome, who discovered that Jesus had arisen but were afraid to make it known. Here it is Mary Magdalene who proclaims the resurrection. It is Mary Magdalene in John, chapter 20, verse 1, who first announces that the Lord has arisen. Luke chapter 24, verse 10 has it that Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, mother of James and other women, first found the sepulchre empty and told these things unto the apostles. These conflicting accounts agree in the one essential point, that it was the woman or the women who proclaimed the resurrection, and this is as it should be according to the data in the ritual.